Final company speaker is Liesl from Vale, who will then be followed by Christine Jesseman from DLA. So Liesl, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me well? Okay. It's to wake up, everybody. It is an honor and a privilege to participate in the first UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Catherine, specifically to GBI on this. I have only 7 minutes. Do I still have 7 minutes?
Yep, you do.
Okay. So I'll try to summarize Vale's experiences and challenges on implementing the UN guiding principles so far, especially concerning the access to remedy. I got this difficult part of the distribution. Vale is among the largest mining companies today. It was a state-owned company until 1997, when it was privatized. In 2006, it became a multinational with operations in more than 30 countries through acquisitions and organic growth. Committed with sustainable development and determined to gradually improve its sustainability performance, Vale in 2007 formally included the concept of sustainable development in its mission and adopted the Global Reporting Initiative methodology, the G3. We are now discussing the G4, but at that time was the G3, for all its operations and projects. This being not only a report approach, but a managerial improvement process, Vale was able to identify its gaps and develop the policies and tools needed. In 2008, Vale launched its sustainability development policy and tools to implement it. In 2009, Vale introduced its human rights policy based on the Protect, Respect, Remedy UN framework. We actually joined UN consultation and engaged with the working group during the process. Vale's human rights guidelines were defined in 2010, and continuous human rights training process started in 2007 with the security personnel and in 2011 with Vale leaders. With the launch of the UN Protect, Respect and Remedy guidelines in 2011, we are now going through a revision of our due diligence process, reviewing our human rights policy, improving our assessment capacity. We are actually working with Maplecroft on a global human rights due diligence dashboard for Vale and developing Vale's due diligence strategy and plan. We are integrating the human rights lens into our existing operational procedures throughout the operations life cycle and on our value chain, and improving our tracking and reporting on human rights based on the criticality of our operations and also on allegations received. Improving also the access to remedy for local communities in the regions where we operate. On the access to remedy specifically, we have been focusing on two main areas: improving our issues management, which includes complaints and grievances mechanism, and also responding to allegations. In order to do that, Vale has changed its organizational structure, its personnel profile and headcount, its IT systems and procedures as well. It has also created a regional governance structure to address complaints that require a higher hierarchy to be solved. In 2011, Vale created the Community Relations Department to centralize the management of community demands, complaints, requests, etc. It has also increased the number of community relations team significantly on site level and has created a standardized community demand system that empowers the local team to register and follow up the demands, and the corporate area to have a better picture of what is happening on site and a more aligned and faster response to complaints. It is clear to us that if we are able to respond to community complaints in a more effective way, there are less chances that they will become grievances. That is one of the greatest challenges, to be able to solve impacts when they seem to be minor inconveniences and not let them escalate. So to give importance to very small things, it's a very important and strategic point. Another important challenge is to be able to roll out this process to all our operations worldwide effectively and to create different entrance points culturally adapted, complementary to the community relations representatives. So we already have an 0800 line, complaint boxes, but what other kinds of strategies we can adopt to make sure we are getting all the complaints from the communities. This links to another challenge, finding adequate business and human rights training partners. As we are mentioning here, training is not just, transferring content. In human rights, it has to be an attitude change. It has to be able to deliver that. And to find local NGOs or academic institutions with the right focus, aligned with the UN guiding principles, specific to our sector, to our business focus, and with the ability to work on a large scale has proven to be difficult. We are now working with the FGV São Paulo. It's a university, a very well-known university in São Paulo, and we think we are on the right path. But it's taking us a long time to be able to really find the right process. Concerning our second area of focus of access to remedy are the allegations that arrive publicly. Whenever an allegation is received, it is immediately assessed on a fact-find process. When the information is not enough, an in locus assessment is made, and when necessary, an external expert is involved. In this sense, another important challenge we face is working together with human rights NGOs to find solutions and engage proactively. The name and shame approach, although important to make companies more aware of issues that sometimes may fall in between the cracks or didn't get enough attention, may have a very negative outcome sometimes. A reactive and defensive response by the company, shifting the focus from a remedy matter to a positioning matter instead. So you start discussing how you defend, what are the words you're going to use instead of really focusing on the remedy part of it. The proactive engagement with companies may reinforce the focus on finding solutions to violations. Moreover, a large number of allegations a company faces nowadays are usually in gray areas, where the need for cross-sector governance and remediation solutions are needed, or where the guidance is still under development. Just to give you an example, and we have many different examples on that, companies that have indigenous communities relations are facing the challenges related to FPIC, free prior informed consent. The framework for that is still under discussion, and there are significant doubts concerning its implementation, both from the government side, from the company side, and from the indigenous communities and indigenous movements and government agencies. It is so all these actors I mentioned, experts, indigenous communities, indigenous movements, NGOs, governments, and companies need to work together to be able to address this issue on a more constructive way. We won't be able to do it by ourselves. In order to effectively implement the UN guiding principles, we truly believe that working together with this cross-sector integration it's absolutely necessary. We are aware of the challenges, sometimes frustrated with the time frame it will take for some of those principles to be fully implemented in all our operations and value chain. But we are optimistic about the positive and preventive impact this methodology will have in our case in Vale's community relations over time, as well as in further enhancing our social license to operate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liesl. I'll hand straight over to Christine as respondent.
Thanks very much. I'm Christine Jessamine. Thanks very much to Catherine and to the Office of the High Commissioner for having me here. I'm from the law firm DLA Cliff Decker Hofmeyr. We're from South Africa and we're part of the DLA Piper Group. Now, unusually, or perhaps not so unusually if you deal with large law firms, I am the pro bono and human rights partner, which in my book makes me the nice lawyer in the group. What I wanted to specifically discuss, I do hope, is informed by a perspective which comes from me being in this unique position, where I operate in a commercial environment, both in the domestic context and in the international context, but I also deal specifically with non-profit organizations and particularly in the human rights and business field. Fortunately, Liesl has been very generous with her time with me before, so I am aware of the very good work that they are doing in this field. And the particular aspect which I was asked to speak about is access to remedy. And I wanted to draw on a few points that I'd heard today and also in the previous presentations as well. Now, firstly, we're speaking very much about the guiding principles as this international framework, but we do, of course, operate in a domestic legal framework, and this is one of the first things that the guiding principles tells us to do. Understand the human rights context within which you're operating, understand the legal context within which you're operating in a domestic context. And I wanted to touch on those two things. Firstly, from the legal perspective, when I think in the domestic context, there are some countries where there either is a framework in place and you have to work within that framework, and very likely that framework is also developing, which means you need to develop with it and be able to respond to it, which means that whatever grievance mechanism you have in place will also have to, even if you've driven this initially from a corporate perspective, will have to be able to respond to whatever the state is putting in place from its own regulatory perspective. And when I think of an example where this may be relevant, in South Africa we have bargaining councils. There is a very strong labor movement. When I'm thinking of a corporate level grievance mechanism which is put in place, the first thing I think of is that it must not conflict with or otherwise undermine the existing legal framework which is in place, and must very much complement and support that. The second thing that I'm thinking of is that of the social context. Now, everyone is very much aware of the ongoing disputes in South Africa, and as much as we have mechanisms which we put in place, we have corporate endeavors to have grievance mechanisms in place. I think it is also very important not just to focus on the regulatory environment within which you operate, but also the social context within which you operate. There is a legacy before you came to whatever country in order to set up your operations, and that is also evolving. In South Africa, there are very important discussions, national debates, and whether a company is not necessarily involved in those national debates, I think you need to be aware of those national debates. I was listening to a very interesting discussion by some well-known South African commentators who were saying, the current issues are not so much about poverty and eradicating poverty, but they are about inequality. And these are social debates which I think corporates also need to be a part of. The second thing I wanted to touch on is really about developing law. Some countries are putting in place regulations as imperfect as they are. They're still not sure quite how they're going to work, and you will need to engage with these mechanisms. This one mechanism, since I have 1 minute, is in the current Companies Act in South Africa. Now, the Companies Act requires corporations to have social and ethics committees in place. I know this because I also sit on one of the social and ethics committees. Now, this is all listed entities, all state-owned entities, and also private companies which have a certain public interest score, so more than so many employees, etc. You're required to report on a number of things. You attract personal liability if you don't comply, and you have to report to shareholders. And this is on compliance on all human rights issues, sustainability issues, compliance with the UN Global Compact, and this is obviously accountability to shareholders, which provides you with this new remedy as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, and thanks to all of our speakers today. Plenty of food for thought. I have in front of me a list of people who've signed up to ask a question. What I'm going to do is group the questions together and then hand them back, ideally to one panelist per question, so we can keep the flow going and get through as many of your questions as possible. So if your question is for a specific person, please say so, because that will help. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, no more than 2 minutes for the intervention. 60 seconds would be great also. No, I'm kidding. We're fine. Ms. Ashley Owens from the United Nations University.
Thank you very much.
Take my chair.
Thank you. It's a bit less awkward than being on my knees. I'm from the United Nations University and we're based in Tokyo, which might be surprising for some people. My question is for the gentleman from Hitachi. I worked as a lawyer for many years in Tokyo, and I've spoken to different law firms in Tokyo, businesses, and more recently diplomats from Tokyo. And when I talk about the guiding principles with them, overwhelmingly the response that I seem to get is, well, this doesn't really apply to us. We have this in place already. This is something that is more relevant for your emerging market economies and not for countries like us. Now, I think certainly there's an element of best practice that is already underway in Japan, which is commendable. I just wondered what the representative from Hitachi thinks on that score. Is Japan already are the companies in Japan already where they need to be? And if not, I mean, we've heard from the representative from Vale that, even in a company that's had a focus on these issues since 2007, there was still really dramatic changes that needed to be made internally to bring about compliance. In that case, what does the representative from Hitachi think about the best way to engage Japanese companies on this topic? How to best get them involved in this and understand its importance? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. I'll take 2 more, and then Margaret's also waving at me to come in. So next on the list is Adam Green from the US Council for International Business. Adam.
Sorry.
It's kind of like a seance.
Yes. No. Quick comment is that I still hear most of what I hear so far in the 2 days is through the lens of foreign investment and multinational enterprises. I'm still slightly concerned we're not really hearing a lot from SMEs. I know there's a panel tomorrow, but in this context, since that's currently the nature of this discussion, a question for the companies is the intersection between the corporate responsibility and the state duty is clearly a big part, and that the corporate responsibility can actually it can be perceived to expand or contract depending on the capabilities of the state and the operating environment where they are. If there's massive corruption in one country, but it's very transparent and clean in another, what you may be asked to do will differ. What are the challenges in relation to having a consistent global approach versus these wildly differing local contexts where you may find yourselves, and how do you really try to apply a global approach where the actual activities can vary dramatically based on the capacity of the state and the operating environment?
Thanks, Adam. A lady from the Clean Clothes Campaign, Miss Irene Zelden-Rust. There you are.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow up on something that Mr. Sang from Flextronics said about his business being very audit-driven. And it goes a bit to how we're going to avoid the risk. That would be my question for the panelists, that when we start on due diligence, human rights due diligence in business, that we don't replicate the same mistakes that have been made over the past 15 years with the auditing industry in CSR. We've seen 2 of the biggest fires in the history of global manufacturing in the last 3 months. One in Pakistan, where 312 workers died. That was a factory that had recently been certified by SA 8000, audited by 2 major global audit firms in the months just before. And the fire last week in Bangladesh, Tazreen, who had been audited just less than a year ago by BSCI, the Business Social Compliance Initiative, which also relies on these same global audit firms. For years, people have thought, okay, the audit firms, we were critiquing them a lot for not involving workers, for not using labor rights expertise, but we thought they are maybe good at picking up the visible issues, but not the invisible ones. Both of these factories, Ali Garments as well as Tazreen Enterprises, didn't even have an emergency exit. Tazreen Enterprises was 9 floors high. Ali Enterprises, where 200 workers fled into a basement because they couldn't exit the barred windows, they were literally cooked. So far, we have not been able to get a single audit report from any of these audit firms to actually check what went wrong here. My question to the entire panelists, how are we going to make sure that impact on due diligence is going to take a very different method so it can actually be meaningful?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Before I hand these questions back to the panelists, Margaret, you wanted to come in. Margaret Young from the UN Working Group.
Thank you. The UN Working Group was very conscious of the opportunity that we had with the annual forum to invite so many different practitioners and experts and folks that are grappling with this on a day-to-day basis from within companies and within governments. And so we also each, as we go around to different sessions, we have key things that we're trying to learn as well, not just from the panelists, but also from the audience. And a number of those was actually hinted at in the excellent presentations that were made by the panelists. And so I just want to draw some of those out and pitch those out to the audience as well as to the panelists to see if we can get some thinking around some of these issues. And one of those, I'll work backwards, because one of those did relate to the auditing question. And the gentleman from Flextronics did say, these issues were all issues that we had already identified. We knew that they were problems. And so the question is really, how do we work with our buyers to build our own capacity to address these problems? And I think, capacity building within the supply chain is one of the issues, one of the multiplier effects that we can get in terms of really tackling human rights. So I wanted to pitch that out and see if we can get some good ideas around how to do some of the capacity building through the supply chain. Another one was hinted at by 3 of the speakers, and I think, Jim, you're going to kill me for raising this again, but it is that business case. It is, when the gentleman from Flextronics said we could tell we were improving our returnee rate, we were lowering absenteeism, we had all these things that could get the pickup within the company. And Ron from ABB also said they'll roll out the red carpet for you if you can make the business case. But then again, I completely agree with Jim that there are cases where the business case can't be made, and then you do have to just make the human rights case. It's the human rights and do it. But I still think in terms of incentivizing through the business case, we've got to use both of those avenues. We've got to incentivize with the business case when we can, and then use the argument of just do it, it's a human right, when we have to. But I don't think we've fully fleshed out the incentive structures that we could be tapping into, and not just the incentive structures at the business level, but also the incentive structures at the individual level, which some of you hinted at. As Ron rightly said, we're dealing with human beings here, and human beings within a company setting are incentivized or disincentivized through the systems, the structure that we set up in the companies that they play within those parameters. So the better we are at establishing both the incentives lower down within the system, as well as the incentives overall for the overarching business, I think we will be able to drive this field further. But again, heeding Jim's warning that it's not all about incentives and the business case. And then I had one further question that we've been grappling with in the working group, and it was hinted at in the first panel by the speaker from Singapore Management University. And that was, you raised the issue of human trafficking and some of these other challenges that do require that dynamic interplay between civil society and companies and states in order to fully grasp and deal with the issues. And we are finding that there are so many of these human rights issues that do require that more dynamic interplay. Not least was in the recent country visit to Mongolia, where we had issues around the mining industry, but it was, about the collective impacts of mining and how mining overall can damage the environment. But it's not just one mining company, it's a number of mining companies together. And it's not just the companies, it's how they attract in other industries, how you get the boomtown effect, and so many other issues that come into play that have ripple negative effects on human rights. But it requires, again, that good coordinated interaction, which of course must be led by the government. But as Adam was pointing out, the government isn't always equally going to step into place here. So we have to get a better picture, some better lessons as well about how we address some of those negative impacts when it does require not just addressing the simple solutions within a company, but it requires the company really having a good action plan for managing effectively within that system of civil society, government, and company. Okay, so I throw those out, and I expect answers by the end of the session, Catherine.
Okay, answers on a postcard. Thank you, Margaret, for bringing out those themes. I'm going to hand out the questions to the company panelists for this round. Ron, I'm going to give you the first question, which is a really easy one, about Principle 18. So.
Thank you for that, Catherine. And I fully understand the background to the question. As far as the quality of decision-making is concerned, I can only speak from personal experience, and I think it's very mixed. I think a lot of it depends on whether a company really has top management buy-in. Far too many companies don't have that buy-in, and without that buy-in, you are not going to get decisions and processes through to where it counts, through what I call the permafrost layer in middle management, through to sales staff and so forth. And you're not going to get the right kind of auditing either. So I think it is very, very mixed, but to try and put a gloss on it, I think it is quite early days. And coming back to your point about the number of different risk assessment methods, I think we must be a bit careful here. Yes, there are a number out there, but we should not try to impose one single methodology on a particular company. It's what fits, what works, and it's the practitioners within the company, like myself, who know what's going to gel, what's going to work, or what's going to frighten the management back into its corner and lead to underreporting. So I appeal for a degree of flexibility in that respect. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thank you. Yes, please, Liesl. If you comment now, then you should also answer the question from Adam Green about global versus local. You can do two in one.
The corporate responsibility against the government. Is it on? Okay. Just to comment on that, I think it's not one over the other, risk assessment, impact assessment. It's actually which is the right tool for each phase. So we at Vale use the front-end loading approach, which means during the feasibility studies, if we bring in the risk analysis, we can actually change the design of a project right from the beginning. So I will avoid lots of impacts, unnecessary impacts, if I can have this kind of influence. After that, during implementation, we need to assess impact. And then I think the best tool for that is the grievance mechanisms approach. I mean, if you have an ongoing, continuous communication with the community, you will know what's happening. And sometimes it's not going to be your operations, it's going to be your contractors. Is a truck that is, I mean, the amount of trucks that are crossing a specific road and representing risk to the communities and to the kids, etc. So I think you need all these tools. I don't think we can not use them, and they are adequate for each phase of the process or implementation. In terms of corporate responsibility and the state duty to fulfill human rights and protect, I think this is a extremely important issue, and we haven't been discussing that enough. When we operate in regions that don't have, the basic rights fulfilled by the government, this represents huge challenges. And then we hear a lot from the corporate side, saying, well, infrastructure is not my obligation, schools is not my obligations, this is the role of the government. And it's true, it is. But if you get stuck on this kind of discussion, you won't move forward. So the way we have been approaching that, and it's not easy way, and it's not always, it doesn't always work well, but we have been engaging with them and trying to find ways to partner with the public sector and reinforce public policies. If they are not reaching, and we operate in remote areas, so if they are not reaching these remote areas, how can we help the local government access, just like an example, resources available on the federal level and really be able to finance their infrastructure needed, the school system needed? How can we actually help improve the quality of education in these municipalities? This is beyond impact management. Of course, the priority is impact management and human rights impact management. But beyond that, and when we are operating in areas that lack and have significant human rights services to the community, you actually have to deal with that as well. So I think we need the partnership approach is the best approach for that.
Super. Thank you very much. Keiichi, could you respond to the question to you about other Japanese businesses?
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, so first of all, I don't think many Japanese companies can accurately understand about guiding principles. That's because the many Japanese companies learned ISO 26000 first. So because lots of people from Japanese companies got involved in the debate of establishment of ISO 26000. So then, as a result, there are lots of Japanese companies that failed a new rule coming from Europe. So then we need to educate, and so if we want to establish guiding principles within Japanese companies, I think two ways. First one is to solve language barriers. So the second one is to utilize a global talent within the companies. So I think understanding of human rights, understanding of the context is key or substantial to promote respecting human rights. So as I mentioned in my presentation, the accurate translation of language is to give a better understanding of what human rights is to employees. And also, in order to do this, so I think we should utilize a global talent. Lots of Japanese companies have the legacy hierarchy. So many decisions were made by Japan and Tokyo headquarters. However, if we think about global, or if we incorporate global perspective, so we should utilize global talent that the company has.
Thank you very much. And then, Tony, just quickly on the audit piece.
Yeah, so thank you. It's a good comment on the audit, and I've always raised the concern about the effectiveness of audits. So it's not on. Sorry. We find that the audit is always a snapshot of what the auditors see when they come to the operation, on whether it's 2 days or 3 days they spend there. And most companies are very good at preparing for audits, right? And then once the audit is over, everything's back to normal, right? So it's not surprising to me of the recent cases that you brought up in Bangladesh and in Pakistan. We did a project recently with a customer of ours, and We know we have a list of the issues that we have identified through our own due diligence, and we invited the customer to appoint a third-party auditor to audit the site. And of all the 30 issues that we have identified, for example, in the health and safety area, the accredited auditor or the third-party auditor came in and found nothing, right? So again, I do have concerns with the competency and the objectivity of these audits, because a lot of these audit firms are really, interested to come into this arena to be able to do a social accountability or human rights audit without the right competencies. So again, it is very important for companies to have a robust due diligence process, because if you can do that well within your organization, you will be able to identify the risks and the impacts that you have, and you'll be able to work on the improvement plans.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. Ron, you wanted to just come in briefly on something that Margaret raised.
Yeah, Margaret, thank you for raising the issue of incentivization. I'd like just to make a couple of points about incentivization of good human rights performance from a corporate perspective. I'm extremely uneasy about that for a number of reasons. I don't believe, and I'm sure my company doesn't believe, in incentivizing people for what they should be doing. A good human rights performance is laid down in our case, in group instructions, directives, codes of conducts, and so forth. And I know my top management would say, we should not be incentivizing what we should be doing in any case. That's an idealized view. There's another area of concern for me, which is my experience with health and safety is that if you start incentivizing reporting, there will be a tendency to brush stuff under the carpet, to make yourself look good, make your business unit look good, to earn your bonus. So it's a very, I'm uneasy about this area, and I just wanted to make those points as part of the discussion.
Thank you, Ron. There's a number of people still on the list. We're now currently in break time, and so I feel really bad that we didn't get through more of the questions. But what would people prefer to do? It's a human rights conference. Let's take a vote. Shall we carry on, or shall we call it a day? Shall we carry on? Take a couple more? Call it a day. Like in any good democracy, there's no real consensus. I'm sorry, I have all of your lovely names here. What I recommend is that anyone who did put their names down, you come straight up to the panelists to ask your question. I'd just like to give a final warm round of applause to all of our speakers. Thank you very much.